In a crowded diner, a single gunshot changed everything. While everyone panicked, one waitress didn't even flinch. Her incredible calm in the chaos caught the eye of a billionaire hiding in the corner. He saw in her a strength that couldn't be taught. A leader where others saw a victim. The next day he made her an offer that shocked the world, proving that the most valuable treasures are often hidden in plain sight. Welcome back to Hub Stories. I've truly missed you all. Thank you so much for staying with me. Your love and support mean everything. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring even more emotional, powerful, and life-changing stories. And trust me, you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's continue the story. The first sound wasn't a gunshot, but the bell above the diner's door. A cheerful ding-ding that usually signaled a late night, customer craving pie and coffee. For Chloe, that sound was the rhythm of her life. It was 11:17 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, and the Skyline Diner was her world. She was balancing 3 plates of the day's special apple crumble with a scoop of vanilla, her movements a tired but graceful dance between crowded booths and sticky tables. In the corner booth, shrouded in shadow, sat Arthur Pendleton. To the other patrons, he was just a well-dressed older man nursing a black coffee. They didn't know he was a billionaire, a man who commanded boardrooms and owned chunks of the city's glittering skyline. He came here not for the coffee, but for the silence, for the way this place reminded him of a life he'd left behind 50 years ago. The bell on the door chimed again, but this time, it was followed by a blast of cold, wet air and 2 men whose energy was all wrong. They didn't shuffle in, tired from a long shift. They moved with a jittery, aggressive purpose, their faces hidden by cheap ski masks, their hoodies pulled low. "All right, listen up. This is a robbery," one of them yelled, his voice a high-strung crackle that sliced through the diner's soft jazz music. For a heartbeat, there was perfect suspended silence. Then chaos. The second man, taller and broader, fired a single shot into the ceiling. The bang was apocalyptic. Plaster dust snowed down. A woman screamed, a short, sharp sound that was quickly choked into a sob. Plates crashed as people ducked under tables, their chairs scraping violently against the linoleum. Wallets and phones were fumbled onto the floor in a panicked frenzy. And in the center of it all was Chloe. She didn't scream. She didn't drop her plates. Arthur Pendleton, who had instinctively flattened himself against the vinyl booth, watched her mesmerized. He saw her entire body go still for a fraction of a second, a statue holding 3 plates of pie. He saw her eyes, wide, yes, with fear, but not consumed by it. They were calculating, assessing. In that single, breathtaking moment, she wasn't a waitress. She was a strategist on a battlefield. With a calm that defied all human instinct, she took one deliberate step, then another, and carefully, so carefully, placed the 3 plates of apple crumble down on the service counter. Not a single crumble spilled. It was an act of surreal, profound dignity. "Everyone on the floor! Now, empty your pockets!" the taller robber screamed, waving his gun at a cowering family in a booth. Chloe slowly raised her hands. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried in the terror-stricken room. She wasn't talking to the robbers. She was talking to Jenny, a teenage busgirl frozen in fear by the coffee machine. Chloe caught her eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, then flicked her gaze towards the floor behind the counter. A silent command: "Get down! Stay hidden!" The lead robber stalked towards the counter, his gun swinging erratically. "You, the cash register, now!" Chloe nodded, her movements slow and deliberate. "Okay," she said, her voice low and steady, a soothing balm against his ragged panic. "It's right here. I'm getting it for you." She didn't look at the gun. She looked at his eyes, visible through the holes in the mask. She saw the terror there, a mirror of her own, and she understood that a scared man with a gun was the most dangerous thing in the world. As she methodically emptied the till, her hands trembling but her purpose firm, Arthur Pendleton couldn't look away. He had built his empire on recognizing value where others saw none. He saw it in undervalued companies, in dormant patents, in raw land. And now in this dusty, chaotic diner, he saw it in this young woman. Her calm wasn't passive. It was an active force. She was de-escalating, protecting, managing the crisis with a grace that no MBA had ever taught him. He watched her slide the cash across the counter, her movements smooth and non-threatening. He saw the robber snatch it, his bravado faltering under her unnerving serenity. The entire robbery lasted less than 3 minutes. But for Arthur, it was a lifetime. It was a masterclass in leadership under pressure, a display of a soul forged in resilience he hadn't seen since he was a young man fighting for every scrap he got. As the robbers fled back into the rain, leaving behind a trail of shattered nerves and plaster dust, the diner erupted into sobs and relieved weeping. People hugged each other, strangers clinging to strangers. And Chloe, her duty done, leaned against the counter for just a second, closing her eyes and taking one deep, shuddering breath. The mask of calm slipped for just a moment, and Arthur saw the exhaustion, the fear, the adrenaline crash. Then she opened her eyes, pushed off the counter, and went straight to the crying teenager, pulling her into a firm, comforting hug. "That's it, Jenny, it's over. You're safe. Everyone's safe." In that moment, Arthur Pendleton, the billionaire, made a decision. The world saw a victim. He saw a CEO, and he knew with every fiber of his being that his next move would change everything. As the robbers' footsteps faded into the rainy night, a collective tremor of released fear swept through the diner. Sobs turned into shaky breaths, and the stunned silence was broken by the frantic dialing of phones and the distant, growing wail of police sirens. But in his shadowed corner booth, Arthur Pendleton remained perfectly still, his coffee now cold and forgotten. His entire world had narrowed to a single point, the young waitress named Chloe. While others saw a brave employee or a victim of a traumatic event, Arthur's mind, a supercomputer honed by decades of high-stakes deals and human analysis, was dissecting what he had just witnessed with awe. He wasn't just watching a person. He was witnessing a rare and powerful natural phenomenon. He replayed the moments in slow, meticulous detail. It wasn't just that she hadn't screamed. It was the specificity of her actions, the deliberate, almost reverent placement of the dessert plates. In the face of chaos, she had chosen order. In the face of destruction, she had chosen preservation. That wasn't just calm. It was a deep-seated respect for her work, for the little things that constituted a life of dignity. It spoke of a character that valued order, even when the world was falling apart. Then the eye contact. She hadn't stared down the robber with foolish bravado. No, that would have gotten her killed. Instead, she had met his wild, panicked gaze for a fleeting second, and in that second, Arthur saw her do something extraordinary. She had nodded. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible dip of her chin. Not a nod of agreement, but a nod of acknowledgement. "I see you. I hear you. I will comply." It was a masterstroke of de-escalation, a non-verbal signal that drained the confrontation of its oxygen. She had made the gunman feel seen, and in doing so had subtly taken control. And then, the whispered command to the bus girl. "It's okay." 2 simple words, delivered not as a platitude but as an instruction. She was leading. In the absolute absence of any official authority, with a gun pointed at her, she was managing her team, protecting the most vulnerable person in her charge. Arthur had sat through 1,000 leadership seminars, had paid millions to consultants who preached about crisis management and team cohesion. He had just seen it all executed, perfectly for free, in the span of 30 seconds. This was where his mind made the connection, a synaptic leap that felt less like a thought and more like a memory. The scene before him began to dissolve, the greasy smell of the diner replaced by the damp, fungal scent of a basement apartment 50 years past. He was 7 years old again, huddled with his mother under a rickety kitchen table as his father raged, a hurricane of alcohol and disappointment. The world outside that table was loud, violent, and unpredictable. His mother's hand was clamped over his mouth, not to hurt him, but to silence his whimpers. "Shh, Artie," she would whisper, her voice a fragile thread of steel in the darkness. "Be still, be quiet. Just breathe. Wait for the storm to pass." He saw his mother's eyes in that memory, the same exhausted, resilient, hyper-vigilant calm he had just seen in Chloe's. She couldn't fight the storm. She couldn't reason with it. Her only power was to create a pocket of stillness within it, to protect her child by mastering her own terror. She had to calculate the exact right moment to speak, to move, to breathe, lest she draw the storm's fury upon them. That was the same calculus he saw in Chloe. She wasn't fearless. She was fear-managing. She was assessing the variables, the shaky hand on the gun, the pitch of the robber's voice, the location of every civilian, and making split-second decisions to steer the chaos toward the least harmful outcome. She was creating a pocket of stillness. Arthur Pendleton had spent his life running from that scared little boy under the table. He had amassed a fortune as a fortress, a reputation as a titan to ensure he would never feel that powerless again. He thought he had left that version of himself behind in the dust. But watching Chloe, he realized the core of his success wasn't the fortune. It was the lessons he learned in that darkness, the ability to read a room's tension like a weather forecast, the instinct to stay silent when others panicked, the understanding that true strength often looks like stillness. He had packaged those survival skills as business acumen. Chloe wore hers on a Waitress uniform. The police finally burst in, their heavy boots and sharp commands introducing a new kind of order. People began to stir, to tell their stories, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of relief. Arthur watched as Chloe, after allowing herself that single, private moment of weakness, immediately began moving through the diner. She poured a glass of water for a shaking old man. She retrieved a dropped purse for a weeping woman. She was still working, still serving, still leading. In that moment, Arthur Pendleton didn't see a charity case. He didn't see a feel-good story for the evening news. He saw a raw, uncut diamond. He saw a natural-born leader whose resilience had been forged in a different kind of fire than his own, but one that produced the same unbreakable core. The world was full of people with polished resumes and pedigrees, but it was desperately short of people who knew how to breathe between the thunderclaps. He made a decision. It was as clear and as firm as any multi-billion-dollar acquisition he had ever approved. He was not going to give this woman a handout. The diner, once a stage for terror, was now a tableau of surreal disarray. The air, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and spilled coffee, hummed with the shaky exhales of a dozen near-fatal moments. Red and blue police lights strobed through the rain-streaked windows, painting everyone's faces in alternating shades of panic and relief. Officers moved with a controlled urgency, taking statements, their voices low and practiced. A paramedic was wrapping a blanket around the shoulders of the weeping woman, while another checked the bus girl Jenny for shock. Chloe moved through it all on autopilot, her body operating on some deep-seated program of service that even an armed robbery couldn't erase. She righted a toppled chair, picked up a shattered coffee mug with careful fingers, her movements mechanical. Inside, a torrent of delayed reaction was threatening to break through the dam of her composure. Her hands, now that they were idle, had developed a fine, constant tremor. The image of the gun barrel, so close she could see the machining marks on the metal, was seared onto the back of her eyelids. She was focusing on the granular details, the pattern of the linoleum, the sound of the rain, the weight of the ceramic shards in her hand. To keep the full, crushing weight of what had just happened from flattening her. Just breathe. Just do the next thing. It was the same mantra that had gotten her through her mother's illness, through finals week with no sleep, through 100 other smaller, quieter crises. It was in this state of fragile control that she felt a presence beside her. She looked up, expecting a police officer or her pale, stammering manager. Instead, she found the well-dressed man from the corner booth. He stood with a stillness that was out of place in the chaos, his expensive overcoat seeming to absorb the frantic energy around him, without being disturbed by it. "Excuse me," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a peculiar carrying quality, a calm depth that cut through the ambient noise without effort. Chloe blinked, her customer service smile, a ghost of its usual self, automatically flickering onto her face. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need to speak with an officer?" "I'm fine," he said, his eyes a sharp, perceptive gray fixed on hers. They didn't dart around the room like everyone else's. They held her gaze with an unnerving intensity. "It's you I'm concerned about. The way you handled that situation, it was remarkable." The praise felt alien, misplaced. Handled it? She hadn't handled anything. She had just existed within it. She had survived it. She shrugged, the gesture feeling small and tired. "Just trying to get us all home safe, sir." It was the simple, unvarnished truth. There was no heroism in it, only a desperate, primal calculation for survival. He nodded slowly as if she had just revealed a profound secret. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored coat. He didn't pull out a wallet or a phone. He produced a single, stark white business card. It was heavier than any card had a right to be, a thick, textured stock that felt substantial between her fingers. Chloe looked down at it. There was no company logo, no fancy title, just a name, Arthur Pendleton, embossed in simple, elegant black letters, and below it a single phone number. Her mind, still sluggish with adrenaline, struggled to compute. A business card now? Was this some bizarre kind of networking? Her manager, Dave, chose that moment to hurry over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Pendleton, my God, sir, I am so sorry you had to experience this in my establishment." The police are saying. Arthur Pendleton held up a hand. A quiet but absolute gesture that stopped Dave mid-sentence. Dave, who was usually all bluster and stress, fell silent instantly, deferential in a way Chloe had never seen. That's when the first flicker of realization sparked in her mind. This man isn't just a customer. Pendleton's attention returned entirely to Chloe, as if the flustered manager had simply evaporated. "I am serious," he said, his voice dropping even lower, lending a new weight to his words. "What you displayed in here wasn't just bravery. It was a gift, a rare kind of intelligence." He paused, letting his words hang in the air between them. The diner, the police, the crying, it all seemed to fade into a distant blur. "I have a business proposition for you." A hysterical laugh bubbled in Chloe's throat, but she swallowed it down. A business proposition? She was a waitress who still had student loans and a car that rattled ominously at every stoplight. Her business was remembering which regular took their coffee with 2 sugars and 1 cream. He seemed to read the disbelief on her face. "No gimmicks, no tricks," he continued, his tone utterly sincere. "I believe you possess a quality that cannot be taught. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 10? He gestured with his chin towards the card in her hand. "The address is on the back." And with that he gave a small, final nod, turned and walked away, melting through the crowd of first responders with an easy authority. Dave stared after him, then at Chloe, his mouth slightly agape. Chloe looked down at the heavy card. She turned it over. On the back, in the same elegant font, was an address. Not a P.O. box or a generic suite number, but the name of the city's newest and most iconic skyscraper, a shimmering needle of glass and steel that dominated the financial district. The Pendleton Tower. The tremor in her hands intensified. The dam of her composure finally cracked, not with fear from the robbery, but with the sheer, overwhelming absurdity of what had just happened. In one night she had stared down a gun and been handed a mystery by a man who looked like he could buy the diner she worked, in with the loose change in his pocket. The world had gone mad. And as the card grew heavy in her hand, she felt the terrifying, irresistible pull of a door she never knew existed, cracking open just for her. The rest of the night was a blur of police reports, tearful hugs from her coworkers, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that felt heavier than any double shift. By the time Chloe finally pushed open the door to her small studio apartment, the first hints of dawn were staining the sky a pale gray. The silence was a stark contrast to the diner's chaos. She leaned back against the door, the cold, solid weight of the business card still in her jeans pocket, feeling like a brand against her thigh. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the gunman's wild eyes. But now, another image superimposed itself. Arthur Pendleton's calm, assessing gaze. A business proposition. The words echoed in the quiet room, sounding more absurd with each repetition. Her mind, finally clear of the adrenaline fog, began its assault. "It's a scam," the cynical voice whispered. "An old rich man preying on a traumatized young woman. He'll offer you a personal assistant job that's really something else. You've heard these stories." She pulled the card out and laid it on her rickety kitchen table. It looked alien there, next to a pile of unpaid bills and a coupon for canned soup. Arthur Pendleton. She'd been too shaken to recognize the name last night, but a quick, trembling search on her phone in the diner's back office had confirmed it. The results were a gallery of corporate headshots, articles about philanthropic foundations, and lists ranking him among the wealthiest men in the country. This wasn't just a wealthy businessman. This was a titan. "So what does a titan want with you?" The voice persisted, dripping with self-doubt. "To be his charity case? A feel-good story for the press? Billionaire saves poor waitress. You'd be a mascot, a pet." She thought of her life, the careful calculus of every dollar, the student loans for a social work degree she couldn't afford to actually use because the entry-level pay was too low to cover her mother's medical bills. The constant low-grade hum of anxiety, that was the soundtrack to being one missed paycheck away from disaster. This was her reality. The world of Arthur Pendleton was a different universe, one she only saw in movies or from the window of a bus, passing through the financial district. Going to that meeting felt like an act of supreme arrogance. Who did she think she was? But then she replayed the robbery frame by frame. She saw his face in the corner booth. He hadn't looked at her with pity. He hadn't looked at her with lust. He had looked at her with recognition. It was the same way she looked at a complicated order and instantly knew how to sequence it in her mind. It was a look of seeing a function, a purpose, and his eyes. In that moment when he'd said, "I believe you have a gift," there had been no mockery, only a sincerity so stark it was unnerving. The alarm on her phone buzzed at 8 a.m. She had 2 hours. For 45 minutes she stood in the shower, letting the hot water try to pummel the uncertainty from her muscles. What did she have to lose? Her dignity? It felt like a small price to pay for the chance to answer the question that had been burning in her chest all night. The question of why. She didn't own a power suit. She owned one nice dress. A simple black sheath she'd bought for a friend's wedding. It would have to do. As she put it on, she felt like a child playing dress-up. The woman in the mirror looked like a faded photocopy of the capable waitress from last night. The bus ride to the financial district was a journey into another world. The squat, familiar buildings of her neighborhood gave way to soaring towers of glass and steel that scraped the underbelly of the clouds. The Pendleton Tower was the tallest, a breathtaking lance of reflected sky. The lobby was a cavernous space of polished marble and silent ambient light. People in exquisitely tailored clothes moved with purpose, their footsteps silent on the vast floor, their voices hushed. She felt every eye on her, a starkly underdressed imposter. She approached the vast semicircular reception desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. The security guard, impeccably uniformed, looked her up and down with a neutral professional gaze. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone not unkind but distant. Chloe's throat was dry. She clutched the business card like a talisman, her knuckles white. She opened her mouth, fully expecting to be told there was a mistake, that she was in the wrong place, to be politely but firmly escorted out. I have a meeting," she managed to force out, her voice barely a whisper. She slid the card across the impossibly smooth granite counter. The guard picked it up, his eyebrows lifting almost imperceptibly. He typed something into his computer, his eyes flicking from the screen to her face and back again. The silence stretched, agonizing. Then he looked up and his entire demeanor changed. The professional distance vanished, replaced by a look of genuine, deferential respect. "Of course, Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice now warm. "Mr. Pendleton is expecting you. Penthouse suite. The private elevator is right this way." He gestured towards a set of brushed bronze doors, isolated and gleaming. As the doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh, Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it, the point of no return. With nothing but a stranger's cryptic words and a fragile thread of hope, Chloe Johnson, the waitress, stepped into the elevator that would lift her out of her world and into his. The private elevator was a world of its own. The doors closed with a hushed thud, sealing Chloe in a capsule of silent, polished brass and soft indirect lighting. There were no buttons to press. It simply began to ascend, so smoothly that the only sensation was a slight pressure in her ears. She watched through the glass wall as the city fell away. The cars shrinking to toy models, the people disappearing entirely. It was a literal and metaphorical lifting away from everything she knew. Her reflection in the brass was pale and wide-eyed. "What are you doing here?" It seemed to mock her. The simple black dress that had felt appropriate an hour ago now felt cheap and threadbare in this environment. She clenched her hands, still noticing the faint tremor that had lingered since the night before. She was a scrap of the chaotic, gritty real world that had been accidentally swept up into this temple of order and wealth. With a gentle, almost imperceptible chime, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open directly into Arthur Pendleton's personal realm. It wasn't an office. It was a skyborn sanctuary. One entire wall was a single, flawless sheet of glass, framing the city below like a living map. The room was sparsely but exquisitely furnished, a low-slung sofa of buttery leather, a single abstract painting that probably cost more than her lifetime earnings, and a wide desk carved from a single piece of petrified wood. There were no piles of paper, no blinking computer screens. The air was still and quiet, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old books. Arthur Pendleton stood by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the immense skyline. He turned as she entered, and he wasn't smiling. His expression was serious, contemplative. "Chloe, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and measured. He gestured to a pair of chairs facing the view. "Please sit." She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her back ramrod straight. The view was dizzying. From up here, the diner, her apartment, her entire life, were invisible, swallowed by the scale of the city. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" he asked. "No, thank you, sir," she managed, her voice tight. He nodded, taking the seat opposite her. He didn't fill the silence with small talk. He simply studied her for a moment, his gray eyes missing nothing, the nervous set of her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the view and back to him. "Tell me, Chloe," he began, leaning forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. "Last night, in those first few seconds when the gun was out and everyone was screaming, what was the very first thought that went through your mind, before you decided to be calm?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that it bypassed her rehearsed answers. She wasn't being interviewed for a job. She was being psychologically dissected. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I didn't decide to be calm," she admitted, the truth tumbling out. The thought was, the plates. I was holding 3 plates of pie. My manager, Dave, he's very strict about breakage. It comes out of our pay. And I remember thinking, I cannot afford to drop these. It was stupid. Arthur's eyes gleamed. It wasn't stupid. It was brilliant. Your brain, under extreme duress, latched onto a tangible, manageable task. It anchored you. It kept you from being swept away by the panic. That's not a reflex everyone has, he paused. You said something to your manager last night. You said, when you grow up in a storm, you learn to breathe between the thunderclaps. Tell me about the storm. Chloe. And so she did. Haltingly at first, then with a quiet flow, she spoke of a childhood shaped by financial insecurity, of a mother whose chronic illness was a constant draining presence, of being the adult in the house from too young an age. She spoke of learning to read the mood of a room the moment she walked in, of knowing when to be silent, when to make herself small, and when to step forward and take control. She didn't frame it as a hardship, just as the facts of her life, the curriculum of her own, unaccredited university of survival. When she finished, Arthur was silent for a long time, looking out at his city. Then he turned back to her, his expression one of absolute conviction. "That's exactly it," he said, his voice low and intense. "You understand pressure. You understand real-world consequences. You understand people at their most vulnerable." He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to the chair. "I am launching a new foundation. Its working name is the Calm Harbor. Its mission is to provide crisis management training, security infrastructure, and mental health support for small businesses in high-risk neighborhoods, the kind of places big corporations and city grants forget about, the kind of place you work." Chloe nodded slowly, beginning to see it. That sounds amazing, sir." But Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "It cannot be run by a suit in an ivory tower. It cannot be run by someone who learned about crisis from a textbook. It needs a heart. It needs a soul. It needs to be run by someone who knows real fear and real strength, and the vast, vast distance between the two." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the immense space between them. "I want you to be its CEO." The words hung in the air, simple, declarative, and utterly, world-shatteringly insane. Chloe's brain short-circuited. The air left her lungs. She actually looked over her shoulder, certain he must be speaking to someone else who had entered the room unseen. What? Was all she could stammer. "CEO," he repeated, the acronym sounding both foreign and definitive. "Chief Executive Officer." A hysterical laugh bubbled in her chest. "Mr. Pendleton, I don't know anything about running a foundation. I have a community college degree in social work. I can manage a dinner rush, not a multi-million-dollar budget." Arthur Pendleton actually smiled, a small knowing curve of his lips. "Chloe, I can hire 100 MBAs who can read a balance sheet. I can hire consultants who can write a 50-page strategic plan. I can't hire someone with your kind of courage. I can't hire your lived experience. I can't hire the instinct that told you to save the pie plates, to keep from shattering." He leaned back, spreading his hands. "I will provide you with all the support you could ever need. A CFO, A CO, a team of the best advisors on the planet. They will handle the how. You will be the why. You will be the North Star. You will ensure this foundation doesn't just throw money at problems, but that it actually understands them. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. I'm not offering you a job, Chloe. I'm investing in a leader I saw born in a moment of chaos. The question is, are you willing to accept the investment? Chloe stared at him, the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom he was offering her a piece of. The world tilted on its axis. CEO. The word was no longer just a title. It was a doorway to a life she had never dared to imagine, and as she met his steady gaze, the tremor in her hands finally miraculously stilled. The news broke not like a ripple but like a seismic shockwave. Arthur Pendleton's PR team, masters of controlled spectacle, released the story with a single, elegant press release that hit every major news desk simultaneously. The headline was a deliberate echo of a viral tabloid sensation. Pendleton. Foundation appoints new CEO. Diner hero Chloe Johnson to lead. The Calm Harbor Initiative. The world, as Arthur had predicted, was shocked. Then it went berserk. For Chloe, the next 72 hours were a surreal, high-velocity blur conducted from the serene, 42nd floor of the Pendleton Tower, in a temporary office that was still 3 times the size of her apartment. Her old cracked smartphone, once a lifeline to her mother and her work schedule, became a scorching brick of incessant noise. It buzzed and chimed with a relentless torrent of notifications, texts from numbers she hadn't heard from in years, Facebook messages from distant relatives, and a voicemail inbox that filled to capacity within hours. The media frenzy was immediate. News vans, their satellite dishes pointed like cannons, camped outside the now famous Skyline Diner. Dave, her former manager, gave a dozen tearful, proud interviews. Suddenly, the wise mentor who had always seen her potential. Reporters dug through her past, unearthing her academic records and her mother's medical history, piecing together a narrative of the struggling waitress that was both true and painfully reductive. The court of public opinion was in session, and the verdicts were shouted from every corner of the internet. "This is the most inspiring thing I've ever seen," one tweet declared. "A billionaire who actually sees potential, not pedigree." "It's a disgusting PR stunt," a cable news pundit argued on prime time, his face flushed with indignation. "Pendleton is exploiting a traumatized young woman for good press. She'll be a figurehead, a puppet. It's cynical and cruel. She's completely unqualified," commented a viral LinkedIn post from a smug executive. "This devalues the entire profession. You can't put someone in a cockpit just because they stayed calm during turbulence." Chloe saw the headlines, the comments, the think pieces. She saw her own face, a photo from her community college yearbook, splashed across national television. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of praise, and venom that threatened to drown out the quiet conviction that had led her to say yes. But Arthur Pendleton had been true to his word. He became her shield. He assigned her a unflappable, kind-eyed woman named Eleanor, who became her chief of staff, gatekeeper and media wrangler. Eleanor's first act was to take Chloe's phone and hand her a new, secure one. "This one," she said gently, "is for your new life. The other is for your old one. You can look at it when you're ready." A team was assembled around her with breathtaking speed. There was Mark, the razor-sharp CFO who could make a budget sing. There was Anya, the pragmatic COO who lived for logistics and operational flow. They were the best in their fields, plucked from prestigious firms and offered bonuses that made even their jaded hearts skip a beat. Their mandate was clear: support Chloe, execute her vision, handle the how. The first team meeting was the most intimidating moment of Chloe's life, surpassing even the robbery. She sat at the head of a gleaming mahogany table, facing a room full of people in power, suits who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and professional politeness. Her palms were damp. The acronyms they used, KPI, ROI, SWOT, were a foreign language. But then Mark started talking about fiscal responsibility and grant allocation, and how to prevent funding leakage. He was talking, in his complex financial terms, about making sure the money actually got to the people who needed it and didn't get lost in administrative bloat. Chloe found her voice. It's like It's like making sure the right table gets the right order during a rush, she said, her voice small but clear. If you mix up the tickets, the food gets cold, the customers get angry, and the kitchen gets backed up. You have to have a system that's simple, clear and foolproof even when you're overwhelmed. A silence fell over the room. Mark stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Yes, he said, a note of surprise in his voice. That's a remarkably accurate analogy. The ticket is the grant application. The kitchen is our disbursement department. We need a system that doesn't allow for mixed tickets. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. They stopped seeing a waitress and started seeing a translator, someone who could bridge the gap between their high-level strategies and the gritty reality of a family-owned bodega facing a shakedown or a laundromat. Dealing with a break-in, her days became a whirlwind. Mornings were for crash courses in non-profit law and corporate finance. Afternoons were spent with architects, reviewing plans for the first Calm Harbor Community Center, and Chloe was the one insisting on better lighting, a more welcoming reception area, and a dedicated, soundproof room for the mental health counselors. If it feels like a clinic, people won't come, she explained. It has to feel like a sanctuary. She worked 16-hour days, her brain aching with new information, her heart soaring with the possibilities. She would often pause, looking out from her incredible height over the city, and pinpoint the neighborhood where the diner was, where her old life was. The world had called Arthur's move a shock. For Chloe, the real shock was discovering that the strength she'd always used to survive was the exact same strength she could now use to build. The storm hadn't destroyed her. It had taught her how to design a better shelter, for herself and for thousands of others. 2 years. In the relentless churn of the news cycle, it was a lifetime. The shocking headline of the Waitress CEO had long since faded, replaced by political scandals and celebrity gossip. But in the world of urban communities and philanthropic circles, the Calm Harbor had become something more than a story. It had become an institution. The foundation's second anniversary gala was not held in a sterile hotel ballroom, but in the soaring, glass-walled atrium of the very first Calm Harbor Center, located in the heart of the city. The space was a physical manifestation of Chloe's vision, modern and professional, yet warm and inviting. Local artists' work adorned the walls. The furniture was comfortable and durable, and the air hummed not with anxiety, but with the vibrant energy of hope. The guest list was a testament to its impact. There were city officials in tailored tuxedos and philanthropists in glittering gowns, but they were seated alongside the true heroes of the Calm Harbor's story. Maria, the owner of a corner grocery store, who had used the foundation's security grant to install new lighting and cameras, then used the de-escalation training to peacefully dissuade a group of shoplifters. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, whose family restaurant had been on the brink of closure after a break-in, now thriving after a Calm Harbor. Microloan and pro bono legal aid helped them rebuild. They sat at their tables, their postures a little straighter, their eyes a little brighter, their laughter unburdened. Chloe stood at the edge of the crowd watching it all. The woman in the simple but elegant, emerald green gown was almost unrecognizable from the waitress in the stained apron. It wasn't just the clothes or the expertly styled hair. It was the way she carried herself with a quiet, grounded authority that had been earned in boardrooms and community centers alike. She watched as Anya, her COO, laughingly taught a city councilwoman the intricate steps of a popular dance from her homeland. She saw Mark, her once skeptical CFO, passionately explaining the foundation's financial model to a potential donor, using Chloe's own diner ticket analogy. Then it was time for her speech. A hush fell over the room as she walked to the podium. The spotlight found her, and for a terrifying second, she was back in the diner, all eyes on her, the weight of survival crushing down. She closed her eyes, took a slow, deep breath, the same breath she had taken while holding those 3 plates of pie, and the feeling passed. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping over the dignitaries and settling on Maria, on the Chens, on the people whose lives mirrored her own. 2 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified through the room. My world was a few hundred square feet of linoleum, coffee stains, and the constant, gentle clatter of plates. I measured my life in tips and shifts, and my greatest ambition was to make it to the end of The month without my car breaking down. A soft, knowing murmur ran through the crowd. I believed that courage was just the absence of panic. That strength was just the ability to endure. I believed that the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who made the rules and those like me, who just lived with the consequences. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was utterly silent, captivated, and then on one very terrible, very ordinary night everything changed. But not because of the fear, because of a single quiet act of seeing. Her eyes found Arthur Pendleton, seated at a table near the front. He wasn't smiling boastfully. He was simply listening, his expression one of profound respect. Someone, Chloe continued, her voice thickening with emotion, once saw the calm in my chaos. In a moment when the world saw a victim, he saw a person. He didn't see a waitress to be pitied or a statistic to be helped. He saw potential. He taught me that the greatest wealth isn't money in the bank. It's the vision to see the strength in others, and the courage to give them a chance to prove it to themselves. She went on then, not about herself, but about them. She told Maria's story, highlighting her quick thinking. She celebrated the Chen's resilience. She painted a picture not of a foundation built by a billionaire, but of a community fortified by its own collective strength. Simply given the right tools and a little faith, the calm harbor was never about creating a shield against the storms of life. She concluded, her voice rising with passionate conviction. We all have storms. This foundation is about building better ships. Ships with stronger hulls, with reliable navigational tools, and with a crew that knows how to steer together. Because a safe harbor isn't just a place to hide. It's a place to dock, to repair, and to gather the strength to sail out again, stronger than before. As she finished, the applause was not polite. It was a thunderous emotional wave that shook the very foundations of the building. People rose to their feet, their eyes glistening. But the most powerful moment came after, as the crowd mingled again. An older woman, a small business owner Chloe had helped, approached her, clutching her hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. You made us feel seen. Arthur Pendleton finally made his way to her side. He didn't offer praise or congratulations. He simply looked at her, at the room she had filled with hope, and gave a slow, satisfied nod. It was always in you, Chloe, he said quietly, for her ears only. I just provided the light so you could see it yourself. In that moment, surrounded by the living, breathing proof of her work, Chloe Johnson understood the true ripple effect. It wasn't about the news headlines or the shocked world. It was about the single mother who could keep her business open. It was about the community that felt a little safer, a little stronger. The shock had faded, but the hope it had unleashed was just beginning to spread. One life, one business, one calm harbor at a time. The morning after the gala, the world, predictably, wanted a piece of the story once more. News outlets ran features on the waitress-turned-CEO's triumphant night, and talk show hosts clamored for interviews. Arthur Pendleton's office was flooded with requests for a joint appearance, for him to finally explain his radical experiment to the public. He declined them all, not with a brusque dismissal, but with a simple, standardized statement. The story is no longer mine to tell. It belongs to Chloe Johnson and the calm harbor. His silence was not born of arrogance or a desire to remain enigmatic. It was a matter of philosophy, a final, masterful stroke in his mentorship of Chloe. He had done what he had always done best, a skill that had built his empire far more than any aggressive takeover or market gamble ever could. He had seen a resource everyone else had overlooked. To now bask in the spotlight would be to undermine the entire point. It would suggest that he was the miracle worker, that his vision was the singular force of change. In truth, he was merely the catalyst. In the quiet of his skytop sanctuary, Arthur reflected on the night of the robbery. He hadn't seen a waitress. The label was a societal convenience, a box to put people in so you didn't have to look too closely. What he had seen was a masterclass in applied emotional intelligence. He had seen a leader operating in a space with no formal authority, a strategist making critical decisions with zero time for deliberation. He had recognized the same hypervigilance he'd seen in the most brilliant crisis managers he'd ever employed, the same ability to read micro-expressions he paid fortune-telling consultants to analyze. In Chloe, it was raw, organic, and born not of theory but of a life that demanded it. He hadn't given her anything she didn't already possess. He had simply provided the platform for her gifts to scale. The world was shocked because they operated on a simple, Transactional logic, billionaire plus waitress, knackers charity. They could not comprehend an investment that was not purely financial, a calculation of value that was not based on a resume. They saw a hierarchy being upended and called it a stunt. Arthur had seen two forms of capital, one financial, one human, and had recognized that the latter was infinitely more rare and valuable. His genius was not in the act of giving, but in the act of seeing. For Chloe, the legacy was becoming clear in the quiet, ordinary miracles that never made the news. It was in the text message from a shop owner in a different state who had read about the calm harbor and, using the free resources on their website, had successfully de-escalated a tense situation with a disgruntled customer. It was in the community garden that now bloomed in a once gravelly vacant lot next to a calm harbor center, a project started by local teens who said the foundation made them feel like someone believed our neighborhood could be beautiful. It was in the new, unshakable confidence in her mother's eyes, the pride that had replaced a lifetime of worry. She was no longer the Waitress CEO. She was just Chloe Johnson, the CEO. The prefix had fallen away, as Arthur had always known it would. The foundation was her life's work, but the principle it was built upon became her personal creed. In her hiring decisions, she looked past polished resumes for evidence of resilience. In her grant allocations, she prioritized understanding over pity. She had learned from Arthur that true power isn't in commanding from on high, but in unlocking the potential that already exists below. The real shock of the story, the part that truly had the power to change the world, was not the billionaire's action, but the profound lesson it embodied. It was a lesson about the silent potential that resides in every overlooked corner of society, in the single parent juggling 3 jobs, in the retail worker diffusing an angry client, in the student persevering against impossible odds. These were not stories of people waiting to be saved, but of leaders waiting to be recognized. Arthur Pendleton's legacy would not be another skyscraper with his name on it. It would be a paradigm shift, a quiet challenge thrown down to the world. Look closer. The most extraordinary solutions to our most complex problems are not always going to come from the usual suspects in the usual places. Sometimes they are being held with steady hands on a trio of dessert plates in the middle of a storm. The real wealth, the story whispered, is not in having all the answers, but in having the courage to ask a different question. Not what are you, but who are you and what can you become if given the chance? And in that question, lay the power to truly shock the world. One scene soul at a time.